Hello, this week's fare for consideration is a JVC CD S200. This is early 80s 2-head deck. It is built like an absolute tank and it is massive. The width of this is probably a good 3 inches wider than every other deck that I've had in. This, I believe, is a Mark 1, which means that it has ANRS, which is JVC's kind of alternative to Dolby B. There was another version that came up with Super ANRS, which was an update to that. It was their attempt at kind of Dolby C, but wasn't cross-compatible with Dolby C as far as I'm aware, whereas ANRS is kind of compatible with Dolby B. So if you've got a Dolby B cassette, this will kind of work. I'm not too sure of the state of this, if I'm honest with you. So I'm just going to go through, do a bit of a function test now, power it up, and see what we need to be looking at. So just fire tape in and power it up. VU meters are blue backlit, which is maybe a bit difficult to see on the video there, but that works and seems to be fine. So we'll see if we can play the tape and see what happens. So it seems that we have massive levels on the right channel, huge levels on the right channel, but not so much on the left. Just make sure that's not the tape. No, so it seems it's maxing levels out on the right hand side. It is actually playing the tape. Seems to be playing at a reasonable speed, obviously by eye, not testing it. I'm not sure if nothing seems to, it's kind of brought the levels down a tiny bit. It seems to be ANRS is what's affecting it. That's strange. Okay, so we've got a bit of an electronic issue on this one. For the purposes of the tape, actually, the function test of the tape, that seems to be playing. Doesn't want to rewind. Doesn't want to fast forward. The counter is working, which is a good start. So let's take the cover off and see if we can see what's going on mechanically at the back of the transport with this rewind and fast forward stop and whatever else, and then electronically we'll have to have a look at what's going on with the levels. I suspect that perhaps something to do with possibly the heads, or maybe some caps are on the way out, or we can check levels on the board. The cover itself has these giant plastic things on the side for no discernible reason. Inside is a height of late 70s technology. It's quite nice that we've got separate boards for everything. So it seems like we've got an amplifier board, a power board. It seems like there's an ANRS board there separate, which makes life a little bit more simple. It's a bit manky, but nothing amazingly unusual visually. Looking a bit closer at the transport, then all the belts seem to be in place. We have what looks like an idler tyre there, which is probably the control for the fast forward and rewind, which is this little idler tyre here. The belts are quite thin and seem very loose, so that could be the issue. So if I press play, so that's what's playing. This bit on the side here is our frequency counter to make sure that basically that's the way it detects whether your tape's finished or not. So that's good. That I would suggest is running, yeah, it seems to be running from the tape counter belt, which is quite common if I'm honest with you. Motor's nice and quiet, seems to be running relatively well. So let's see what it does when I try and fast forward. So I'm fast forwarding. I would suggest that this capstan belt basically is not tight enough against the capstan. So this motor's running, it's running this and this as a secondary set of belts, probably from the same pulley. However, it's not got enough beef to move this capstan. So I'd say that the belt's probably about toast for that. Either that or it has overstretched or it's too big. That's in fast forward there. And it's not doing anything with that capstan, so it's not moving the tape whatsoever. It's not moving the rails, not moving this idler tyre. So we'll get a transport apart and see what we can possibly do with that first before we move to electronics. So from reading the service manual, it seems for this particular model it's a case of taking almost the entire front plate off before we can get to the transport. So we've got our usual rafter screws on the sides there and some on the top. These screws are showing a little bit of damage, so somebody's been in there previously and there's a few marks on it which would indicate someone's already been in. Same on the opposite side then, these screws are a little bit mashed where somebody's been in. So it's kind of a good sign that somebody's looked after it in the past, I suppose. But let's undo all these screws, get this front panel off and see where we can get with it. So with these kind of perspex front bits and the tape door, I like to try and take these off first just to protect them from any more scratches, because they are obviously a real integral part as to how it looks. So it needs a good clean, but it's actually pretty scratch free. We'll do the same with the door as well there. That just slides off. Keep these safe. Don't forget that one. So looking at this, it's kind of a bit of a typical 70s kind of setup where it's not all going to come out in one block. I think I'm going to be taking off the buttons first, which is fine because I might stick them all through the ultrasonic and give them a really good clean. And also none of the wires actually have any plugs, so they're all soldered into place. So I'm going to have to snip most of the retaining, these little bands that JVC like to use. I'm going to snip the majority of those to give us some room to work. Probably also going to have to remove the recording selector switch mechanism as well. That's all connected to the transport, and I think after that we're kind of in a place to be able to remove it. And that is particularly grimy. Some of the switches have kind of come off as well, so they need resecuring, but that's all come out in a wanna, which is nice. It's difficult to see, but I think next time I'm going to remove this bracket from the base plate down here. There's a couple of screws holding this part in, and this is our, if you can see just down here, if I can just get the camera to focus, it's going to remove that recording switch bracket, and then we'll unscrew this. Once all that's now disconnected, it was just one C-clip kind of holding that in place, and I believe we can possibly kind of move this out the way a little bit. This only is clean anyway because it's manky, so again I'd like to get it out and give it a clean anyway. Now seemingly the only thing holding this in now is this bar here, which connects to this bracket at the back, which is the open and close mechanism. So rather than remove this whole door, I think I'm going to remove this flappy piece, which gives us access to a C-clip, and then I can remove that, and then I think the transport's free. And it's just this C-clip down here, if I can get this out. I think now we should be softly, catchy monkey, in a position to thread this back through here. I'm just using my hand to block it, and thread this arm back through the mech that way, which allows us to remove this piece, and that is our transport able to be wiggled in place. So the main stickling point I have with this, getting this to a place where I can actually work on it and indeed show you what I'm doing, is that there's one or two wires are significantly shorter than the rest, which is this wire here, which looks like a head connection. So for the purposes of access and filming, I'm tempted to desolder this wire here, and I think that might give us a bit more room to work. I can't even really twist it. I can kind of twist it, and I just don't want to damage anything. It's very difficult to get it in a place where it's workable. So I think in order to remove this capstan, this plate's going to have to come off as a start, which also seems to mean that we have to remove this plate, which houses this switch. So we'll remove this, get the capstan off. I think we can route this belt without removing anything else, because it can be accessed from underneath and thread it through. And we'll see what the state of those belts are like. Give the wheels a good clean, and give everything a clean that we can before re-greasing, re-oiling and putting back together. There is in fact one more screw just hiding in the top there. And that should allow us to remove this plate. There's a tiny little spring there which is mounted in place, and a pretty poor washer, if I'm honest. It needs a clean. And there's our capstan. Nice looking capstan, pretty clean. Again, another washer there, a really thin one, covered in grease, absolutely covered in grease. Nothing on the other side because this one's held in by that spring and plate. I'm going to remove this metal cover in order to access the counter belt, which is absolutely horrendously slack. Doesn't even play a tune. So 2 screws for this. So that's now giving us clear access to the counter belt and the rest of the reels and whatnot. There is plenty of sliding joints and whatnot here that looks like someone's used black grease, kind of graphite grease. I'd like to get all that out, as much out as I can, so spend a good amount of time getting rid of as much of that graphite grease as possible. I'll remove this pinch roller assembly as well, get the graphite grease out of that, and then we can have some nice lithium grease, but this is very slack. So that's the first one. That's it, set in its ways. I'm just going to unhook the belts from the motor, get my hand out of the way. This is just going to lift out. Again, very set, it's been sat around for a while. And the final capstan belt. Looking back in the top of the transport there, we are on the back, sorry, not the tape side. There's a rubber roller here, and there's a rubber roller here. These are pretty soft and fine and pliable, so I'm going to give them a good clean, maybe a bit of rubber rejuvenate. Try saying that 10 times. And that generally the rest of the stuff is relatively clean, but I'm going to spend a good amount of time. I'm going to scrub the whole thing out, get all that dirt and muck out. This is the result of me just rubbing that little washer from the back of the capstan. That's all I've done is wash that, and look how much grease is on it. So let's get started with the cleaning.
2,000 years later.
So I've nearly finished the cleaning now, and in the process of cleaning I've stripped a couple of bits off the transport, put them on and taken them off and everything else, and I've got most of the grease out. But what I realised is that this idler tyre assembly is essentially the method that this transport uses for fast forward and rewind. And what had happened is these two idler tyres behind here, these are controlled by the belt for that. And when you fast forward and rewind, so this is in fast forward at the moment, this idler tyre is touching on this reel. I believe that's fast forward or rewind. Anyway, the idler tyres move left and right depending on whether it's going fast forward or rewind, and then touch on the appropriate reel. And then from there, it'll fast forward and rewind the tape. So what I realised is all that was mega shiny. The rubber's still good, but all it is mega shiny, and where it contacts on the back of the reels is also really shiny. So what I've done is removed the C-clips from the reels, which are on the end there, particularly tiny. As you can see, that springs off the left-hand reel. And when they're off, it allows you to just remove the reel like so. And hopefully what you can tell there is I've used some sandpaper to rough up the edge of the wheel to allow to give that rubber tyre as much traction as possible when rewinding and fast forwarding. So if I also show you the opposite side reel, similar sort of thing. It's not pretty, but this was really shiny, and I'm sure when these tyres were new, it possibly worked. However, I have looked, and these tyres are actually not tyres, they're part of this wheel. So the whole wheel would need replacing, and the chances of finding that, I've realised, is 0. So I've got to do what I can with what I have. It's a million times better. I've cleaned all the gunk off the rubber tyres themselves on the outside, roughed them up with some really fine grade sandpaper, and then what I've done is the same on this side, and then I've also, where it comes into contact with the reel, as I've shown you, I've roughed this up. So when we put that on there now, from the back, fast forward works, whereas before it wasn't making any contact whatsoever, it was just slipping. So this is the best I've got for now, but removing the reels also gives us a nice opportunity to clean and re-oil the poles that they sit on. So they can sit there for now separately, and hopefully what I'll do is I'll continue with my cleaning, and then we'll have a look at it once it's cleaned. Similar story for the pinch roller. As with the Nakamichi stuff, this seems to be the original one. It's got a brass insert, which you just don't get anymore. And it's soft, it was just shiny. So fine sandpaper, remove the shininess off the top. Very carefully, very lightly, so you don't cause any flat spots. And then we'll dunk that in the ultrasonic, I think, or something similar if I can get that pin out. And then we'll give that an oil and refit. So what I've done is I've refitted the capstan on the back. So the capstan directly touches the tyre on the back. The axle goes through the transport, touches this tyre here, that touches this tyre on this roller, all of which I've given a really light sanding and a rejuvenate and a clean. And I've just refitted the capstan temporarily. This is not in fast forward. If I put that into fast forward, you should see that wheel come up there. That's now touching the back of the reel in there. And then if I rotate the capstan, that'll now fast forward. It's just popped off because I don't have that C-clip on there, but I'm happy that that mechanism now seems to be working a lot better. Or, well, it works. So, finish this cleaning, and then we get onto oil and grease, new belts, rebuild, and take it from there and do a test. Right then, so now we're about as clean as I think we're going to get. It's time to get some of this back together. So the reels first, I'm going to apply some oil to the rails just on here. And then the reel itself. So now that's in place, then it's time to get the grease out. And do the same on the rear then, and what I do is I get the grease and then cycle through all the functions and look for the sliding points. So I'll stick this on, get it sorted, and then take the excess off. So because these are pretty straightforward general square drive belts, I've got a huge selection of the things. I must have hundreds of them. So it's been a bit of a trial and error job. But the first one to go is going to be for the counter and the kind of pulse sensor, and that goes underneath this starred wheel over here, and then onto that reel there, and drives your counter. The last two belts need to be fed through this black plate. The one down there through that hole there, which goes to the capstan, and then one down this hole here, which goes around this top wheel and then touches on this one. So my top tip for belt threading is a crochet hook, which if you don't realize, it's got a tiny little hook on the end. It's not very sharp, but it just allows you a little bit of play with the belts. So the first one goes around here, and I'm going to poke that through that hole and fit it onto these two pulleys, and then that's going onto the motor. And then this one is going to be for the capstan, and we're going to put that one through this hole, he says. And again, that one's going to go through to the motor on the other side, and we'll flip the transport over. So on the other side then, I'm just going to use my little hook. So they're both where we want them to be. Back to the other side then, I'm going to fit this one fully first, before fitting the capstan. And again, rather than grease, I like to use oil. And a little on the shaft as well. And it was this particularly manky washer, if I can just focus. So I'm going to put that on first. So I'm going to half fit that, and then when I drop it, I'm going to put the belt around it. Pretty close, just that one needs popping over into its own little pulley. And we're good. And then to retain that capstan, then we can just refit this cover. Alright, that's not coming out. Belts are in, everything's turning. Just need to flip it over now. Right, let's get our nice clean protective cover back on. Here we are back together after what has been a bit of a lengthy reassemble, but an enjoyable one, because there's so much room and there's so many mechanical bits and bobs that I can clean and I can sort the grease out. All the buttons have been through the ultrasonic, the bracket and lever assembly that activates the record cut-off switch and the door release, slow release mechanism, all been through the ultrasonic and all been re-greased, and mechanically it does its job. It, really nice. The action's good. Everything that can be cleaned and greased has been cleaned and greased. So time has come to give it a test. I haven't attached the head wires yet. All it is attached is the two motor wires, so the power feed for the motor. There's no buttons at the moment, so I'm kind of pressing upwards, because when you press down it's on an angle and it presses up. So I'm going to power it up. I'm just going to give this a bit of a test with a tape. Today's hits is Dance Hits album, various artists. And we'll go for play first, I think. Beautiful. So that's playing. Obviously I haven't tested speed or anything yet, but fast forward and rewind was the one. Fast forward working great. I only picked this tape up yesterday as well. Sometimes you pick up a tape and it doesn't want to fast forward, rewind or play it until you've kind of reset the tape position inside the tape. I know it sounds weird, but so that works. And I think this one is rewind. This one's rewind. Perfect. So I'll let that rewind all the way back to the start, and then hopefully when it gets to the start it'll detect it's not doing anything and cut off. Beautiful. There we go. So and now I can get the buttons back on. I can get the front panel and everything all sorted and finished, and then we can look at what's going on with the levels and give it a test and a speed and calibration. Alright, so two jobs in one here. I reconnected the heads there, and in doing so all the solder was absolutely minging. I think it's been off a couple of times. It was full of old solder. There was too much solder there. So I used a solder sucker, removed all the solder, resoldered the wires real nice and neat, cleaned it all up and stuff. And then I thought to myself, I wonder what happens now if I test this tape just to make sure that my head wiring was good. And lo and behold, levels are sorted. So the only thing I can think of is there's some kind of cross interference between the wires of the head for the right channel, and we are good. I believe this is ANRS button, no, that one. Doing exactly what we should expect. So that saves us a lot of hassle actually. It just shows a little bit of neat soldering, a little bit of tidying up. It's going to save me a hell of a long time in fault finding and everything else. So I'm really happy with that. I'm going to get this back together, get it calibrated, check the azimuth, and then I think we can play some music. Put all the pushers there through the ultrasonic, give them a good bath, and they've come up absolutely brand new. So all the glue was knackered on the entire rack of switches, so I'm going to re-glue these and get them re-secured and then install the switches. I had a nice clean of the front panel before it goes on there. The bit where it says timer rec is clean, and the bit by the pause button isn't, so that dirt's coming off nicely. I thought this was like a gold colour, but it turns out it's just absolutely minging. So I'll continue with this and get it absolutely spick and span. So with the front rebuilt then, everything is cleaned, all the clear plastics has been window leaned, everything has been absolutely scrubbed to death, and it is looking absolutely fabulous, I'll be honest with you. So let's get the speed sorted and have a look at the azimuth. So small interlude, here we are, back with everything disconnected and taken apart and etc, etc. Went to go use it, what happened? No right channel whatsoever. So it wasn't the head leads, it was in fact the level slider switch. So that is currently in bits. I've cleaned up the level slider switch traces, if I can focus, which are there. That sits in this amazing little metal housing. And then I've had to effect a repair to the actual level slider arm itself. And what this is it has two contacts on the back. And what happened is they kind of melted in place and they were just wobbling about. One of them was wobbled so much it was just not making a contact. So what I've done is I've dremeled into the side of it, and then using some 2-part epoxy, I have epoxied a piece of cable tie into it, because there's absolutely no other way of repairing this. 2-part epoxy won't hold it in place because there's quite a lot of downwards force on those pins to retain your connection. So I've cut into it, wedged that piece of plastic in its place, and once it's dry I'm going to trim it to shape and we should be good to go, ready to go. So this is the kind of stuff that you have in the testing phase, I'm afraid, and this was what failed. So hopefully get this dried, get it trimmed, back together, and we'll have both channels. And here we are, after some filing and some cleaning. That innocuous little piece of cable tie is now really securing those contacts down. And then when we stick it into the switch, as you can see, fits absolutely perfectly. Alright, so that's it tested, sorted, both channels. So yeah, did a bit of tracing, fired the oscilloscope up, traced the signal through it, and lo and behold, there we go. So let's get back together. Now I'm going to sort out the azimuth. Azimuth adjusted, and that left hand screw on the right playback head. Okay, so in process of hooking this up to the oscilloscope just to have a good go at the azimuth and sort the levels out, our little problem with the right channel maxing itself out returned. So I give the unit a bit of a wiggle and whatever else, and a couple of magic taps seemed to get rid of it, which I thought would be a bad connection. So I traced everything back, and I just want to pop this in for just the 20 seconds it's going to take. It turned out to be our own common enemy, the sliding record cut-off switch. And this is when you press record, this will slide across like that, cut out the playback. And this one seemed to be a little loose. It does seem to be a little loose, perhaps causing this channel to short out. I was listening to a tape for a second when it shorted out. It wasn't a nice noise, so I've deoxidized this with some deoxit spray, and I'm going to give it another go. It definitely seems a lot better now. What was happening before as well is there's a little mismatch between the channels, and these two VUs now seem to be playing really well. The left and right channels are balanced and correct together, and the peak level LED indicator below is maxing out at kind of -5 and 0. So I'm cautiously confident that my deoxit of that switch has really helped, and I can crack on with the azimuth correction. I can also refit the arm onto the record switch, which is down there, onto this lever here. And what happens is when you press the record switch, this lever activates those two switches, which is your record cutout switches. Weirdly, if you just use the top one, it cuts it out. If you just use the bottom one, it doesn't. So this mechanism is what connects to the record button. So this arm, that's on the record button over there, and this in turn activates the switch. I just want to point out that these screws down here, and there's one tucked away underneath there. If I can get my camera low enough, you can see that I've actually had to attach the screw to the screwdriver down there with some blue tack in order to get it into where it is. It is. I honestly can't see how that could have possibly been put in and out with everything as it is. But that's Paul's top tip, bit of blue tack. Obviously don't forget to take your blue tack with you. Nobody wants to see that inside a tape deck. So once that's done, all we've got to do now is somehow get this spring down here back onto that arm, which is that's quite tight actually, so I'm going to try and pull that, and it sits inside one of these holes down here. Now we just need to reattach our recording switch to its arm. Now we can test by pressing play and record. It should activate that switch, and it does. Good. And finally we can reattach the door soft close mechanism, which threads through the unit and attaches on this piece here with a C-clip. That's the C-clip in place for the arm. I intended to film this, but I hate C-clips, and the ability to ping these across the room is unbelievable, so I thought I'd just pop it on. Same again with the door release mechanism that now attaches to this pin. Easier said than done. And another C-clip on there. That one wasn't anywhere near as bad, because if you drop that one, it just falls in the bottom. Whereas if you drop that one, it falls in there. So we're getting near to the end here again. I appreciate that we've done this already. And it's a case of just popping this back in and tightening the grub screw up over there. So for this one, attach the right hand side first. Then once that's on its pivot, just align this grub screw with the door, give it a little wiggle and tighten her up. Here we are with Spectroid again on the phone there, and we've got our ceramic screwdriver. Be careful because you're pretty close to the power supply over here, which is a bit twitchy. Noise warning. That's very fast. So we're looking for 6.3. And I'm going to go with that. And with that final adjustment, then that brings us to the end of a lovely, I'm going to say, late 70s deck. This thing has fought me at every opportunity, if it's been a belt or a pinch roller or a switch, or it's waited until it was nearly put back together as well every single time. So I'm actually quite satisfied in the finished product. It's a nice looking thing. It's a good combination of that crossover between 70s and 80s, I think, which does me well. I'm happy with that to be on the shelf. It's all now calibrated, the azimuth's correct, and it's been playing tapes all afternoon. 2 or 3 different tapes, and it's been nice to experience what it has to offer. It's certainly not going to win any awards, but I think in looks it has a lot on its side. So if you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe, and hopefully there will be some more videos up in the next couple of weeks. I have a big queue and some really nice things coming up for repair and restoration, and sometimes just a little bit of calibration. So we'll see what goes on there, and I'm going to shoot off and go make a cup of tea. Thanks, bye!